screen starts glowing, and the film starts rolling. You wanna be knowing what you might be in for. So give the show a listen and find out what you're missing. Put yourself in position for the easy good score.
Hey everyone, welcome to the 207th episode of The Goods, a film podcast. Brian, you might even call this a very special episode of The Goods. One of those uncommon, very special episodes. Just kidding. As with many episodes of The Goods, this is a special one. But there are some particularly special things about this episode. For one, we have a guest. And it's a guest that we've had a handful of times before. And this is Gargus. Welcome back, Gargus.
Howdy.
Welcome back, Gargus. It's always a treat to have you on.
Always a treat to be here. Always do my best to try and throw you guys a bit of a curveball whenever I come on.
That's right. We do have a curveball, but before we dive into it, Brian, you out there?
Hey, everybody. I'm here. We're heading into summertime. Well, no, I guess it's still solidly the spring.
It was like 84 degrees today, which starts to feel like summer.
It threw me off. I've been camped out in my room making storyboards. I just know we're getting there. It's coming.
I'm in Arizona, so it's basically summer all the time for me.
But as Gargus said, we have a curveball, I guess you could call it. We are going to be discussing a serial from 1975 from the TV show Doctor Who. I believe this is from the fourth Doctor, and the title is Genesis of the Daleks. So did I get all of that right, Gargus?
Yes, you did. Season 12, serial number 4.
I want to say, anybody who ever gives you grief for calling the character Doctor Who, you can throw this in their face because, you know, I've always heard, he's not Doctor Who, he's the Doctor. But every episode here, the end credits say Doctor Who, played by Tom Baker. So that's legitimate.
Yes, and that was the credit for every single Doctor up to the 5th, who was the first one to have grown up with the series, and he's the one who started niggling at them like, no, the character's name is the Doctor. I should be credited as the Doctor. I mean, even him and the actors who came after him kind of tend to refer to their time in the part as playing Doctor Who, so...
So anyone listening to a film podcast is probably at least tangentially aware of Doctor Who as a sort of media franchise, primarily a TV show. It is an English show that dates back, I don't know, was it the 60s that it started?
1963.
Okay. And it has been long running, off and on ever since. Has some very unusual traits about it. Some things that make it very different from any other TV show I've ever encountered. I have not watched too much Doctor Who in my life, and I have never immersed myself in the expansive lore and history of Doctor Who. But there is always a lead character who is the Doctor, as we've been saying here. And one of the unique things about the show is it constantly reinvents itself with a new Doctor at the helm. Okay, that's like James Bond. That's like some franchises. But what makes Doctor Who kind of unique in this front is that there's like an in-universe explanation for why there's always a new Doctor. It has to do with like a regeneration. The Doctor is not, in fact, a human, but a species called a Time Lord, I think. And they regenerate. So when we say the 15th Doctor, that doesn't just mean the 15th person to play the Doctor, but 15th in the line of characters. Or I guess it's all the same character, but like a new representation of something about that character. I don't quite know.
Yeah, the underlying personality and goals remain the same, but every time the Doctor dies and every cell in his body scrambles itself up with regenerating energy, he comes out looking different and expressing all those traits in radically different ways. So you'll have one Doctor who's, a short little guy who has clownish tendencies that he uses to hide a brilliant scheming mind. He dies and he comes out as this really tall, very stern dandy type who likes to use martial arts and drive around in cool cars.
Was that the 10th and 11th?
It was the second and third, actually.
Okay, gotcha. I know the 11th had the bow tie. And he seemed like a tall guy, so I thought tall dandy, perhaps.
Yeah, like a bit of a scatterbrained scholarly type.
Is that Matt Smith?
Yes.
Gotcha. I just saw a picture of Matt Smith. Did I send this one to you, Brian? I can't remember. The new Darren Aronofsky, Matt Smith appears as a punk with like a huge mohawk and wearing like pinned on punk clothes, patches and stuff. It's a pretty wild look for someone who is perhaps still most famous for being a geeky doctor and the British sci-fi show.
Interesting. No, I haven't seen that. My familiarity with Doctor Who, you got, listeners, a bit of it in the appendix at the end of last episode. I have only really ever been sat down to watch the Weeping Angels episode. I was slightly aware of it in the 2000s when, I don't know if it was the 8th or the 9th. Who was the bald one?
Christopher Eccleston was the one who had his hair shaved down, so he was the 9th.
9, okay. I remember when that was on the Sci-Fi Channel. I did not follow it, but that was when I got the sense they were really, pushing it in America. Before that, I knew of Doctor Who as the guy with the long scarf and the big fro, so I'm glad that you picked that one to talk about today, because, that was the other one that I knew about.
Tom Baker's the one everybody knows about. I get a feeling even as David Tennant has sort of supplanted him as the most popular one nowadays, the common image of what Doctor Who looks like is going to be Tom Baker.
One more thought about kind of Doctor Who overall. It's the kind of thing where you can go as deep as you want to. There's always more stuff. At least that's been my experience casually talking with Doctor Who fans who I believe go by the name Whovians. And right now we're on camera and Gargus is wearing a Doctor Who shirt. So I assume you identify as such, Gargus.
Yes, I'm been a very big fan. My dad was before me. He grew up with Tom Baker playing on PBS in the 80s. When it came back on the Sci-Fi Channel in the 2000s, naturally, he was all about it. I was really into Christopher Eccleston, didn't quite take to David Tennant, sort of fell off, but I caught up through Netflix around the time Matt Smith was on. And I've been pretty, deep in it ever since. I mean, I've got a large amount of the comics that's published in Doctor Who magazine on my shelf. I've downloaded PDFs for a large number of the books. I've been listening through a ton of the audio adventures produced by Big Finish. You would say I'm a tiny little bit obsessed with it.
Wow.
Probably my main form of fandom.
And one of the hooks of this show is that he's got a spaceship that's also a time machine. So you could set it anywhere and any when that you want to. And that helps to make a show have some longevity.
Provided the BBC can budget for it, of course.
One last thing about the show in general that's just my observation is that it's its own thing and has its own quirks and traits and following, but in some ways it's also a mirror of some broader changes in what's going on in TV storytelling. So you kind of have slightly smaller scale storytelling. We can maybe deconstruct just how true that is, but we have these serials from kind of the older format, and then with the new one, and when I say new, I mean it kind of got rebirthed with the Eccleston one, and kind of looked a little bit more like a prestige cable TV show of sorts, where each episode was its own thing, but you also had like overarching stories that had a lot of interconnected character development and all that. Maybe in more ambitious ways, although I can't say that for sure, having not really seen much of it. This is just my impression. And then nowadays you kind of have, in the vein of like the super Marvel heads and stuff, you have like really complicated rules and lore and stuff. Like, again, you can get in as deep as you want to get.
Yeah.
That's just my take from the outside.
Yeah, all of that is right. The only thing that I would add to it is that Doctor Who does have a large amount of rules and lore that it will gleefully break and throw out and change however it likes in a moment's notice. And you kind of just have to deal with it.
Interesting, yeah.
One of the rules that I'd heard round about the 9th one, I guess, is that they had kind of imposed a limit on themselves. They said you get 13 regenerations, so there could only be a total of 14, I thought, and now we're on to 15. So what did they end up saying to get around that? To get past the final Friday problem?
Yeah, basically the solution that they built in when they introduced the problem, because it was put in for a 4th Doctor story where his archenemy, the Master, has run out of regenerations and is trying to figure out a way for the Time Lords to give him more. Which would have been a problem for a while because, between the classic series and the new one, they wound up killing off all the Time Lords, but then they decide, oh no, they didn't. They just sort of shunted over there outside the universe. So once they decided that the 11th Doctor was actually the last one because they shoved a few more in there as surprises, they said, oh, he's gone and saved the Time Lord, so they're just going to go and give him more regenerations. And they may have accidentally given him infinite regeneration, so don't worry about that anymore.
As long as, what is it they say in The Simpsons, Brian? So long as it's profitable, they'll keep running it.
Yeah, have no fear, we've got stories for years. Who knows what adventures they will embark on between now and the time the show becomes unprofitable.
Yeah, exactly.
He fought a cartoon character the other week. Anything's possible.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I saw like reels from that, Instagram, TikTok reels of the Cuphead cartoon villain.
Since we brought up something that came up recently, I'll say one more observation I've had as someone on the outside, someone who follows TV and movie news generally, but is on the outside of Doctor Who, is that it seems like many comic book broad appeal properties caught up in like identity politics firestorm every step of the way. So that's like, I think the current Doctor is black and it's the first black Doctor, if I'm not mistaken, and there was a woman Doctor, and all of these things are, yeah, I mean, you know how the internet is, so we don't need to dive into it here, but that's just one more thing to be aware of if you're a Doctor Who fan.
That's just internet.
But it's okay, because in between the woman and the black Doctor, they brought back David Tennant. So he was both the 10th and the 14th. So they were calming the waters, perhaps.
But the one we're talking about today comes from 1975. It is a 6-episode serial. Each episode is in the realm of 20-some minutes, so that it adds up to about 2 hours and 20 minutes. Gargus very helpfully provided us a link to a complete copy of it, and it is not, in fact, even bootleg. It's on the official Doctor Who YouTube channel, so you can go watch Genesis of the Daleks from 1975 on the Doctor Who YouTube channel. Very cool. Only 56,000 views, but it was put up 4 months ago, so I imagine that'll go up over time.
Yeah.
And this looked sharp. It looked, I mean, like, I know that part of the problem with the old Doctor Who is that some of it wasn't preserved well. Some of it was lost and found in various states, but this looked complete to me. So,
yeah, Genesis is from deep enough that they stopped the jinking process and they still had the originals. So the remaster is going to look better than quite a bit of what came before, right?
I think I've also read, did they lose episodes of Doctor Who? I think there's episodes of the show that just don't exist anymore. Is that correct?
Basically, it's a problem that affects the entirety of the British television industry because both the BBC and ITV both used to have policies where, in order to make more room, they'd overwrite the videotapes and they'd junk the film canisters because they didn't see any profit in it. Rerunning stuff wasn't as common back then. There wasn't a home video market. They figured, we're going to keep making stuff constantly. We may as well just, get rid of this. And a whole lot of it was lost that way. Thankfully, a whole lot of it has been brought back, far more than is the case for pretty much any other popular British shows of the 50s through the early 70s, thanks to Doctor Who's obsessive fandom. Almost none of it is lost. Like, every single episode has its audio track entirely intact because fans were recording it off their television through jury-rigged recording techniques back in the early 60s.
Wow. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, there's still about 90 some episodes from the 1960s that do not exist in their entirety in the archive.
But this one, so I guess by the 70s they were taking care of them, and so you can go and watch it. So at 2 hours and 20 minutes, it's kind of basically just a movie. I mean, it's like on the longer end for a movie, but you can sit and watch it in one sitting. I watched it in 2 sittings. It's because there's episode breaks. It's very easy to do that, but it's basically a movie. I mean, with some padding in there, but yeah, I think it fits the bill if you are looking for like kind of a standalone little thing that you can just kind of watch. Sometimes it's hard to just watch one episode of a TV show, but you could watch at least this serial. You might be missing context, but you could sit and watch it from start to finish and have a complete story, which is kind of nice.
Yeah. And I would even say, having watched a whole lot of Doctor Who at this period, Genesis of the Daleks is one of the ones that, generally speaking, feels like it has the least amount of filler to it. So it works best as that sort of, sit down and watch it straight through. A lot of the others of this time, even the 4-episode ones, I'd recommend, breaking them up over a few days so they don't get too monotonous. But this one's got a good driving forward momentum to it that makes it work very well as a movie-like experience.
So we mentioned the stars, the 4th Doctor, Tom Baker. And I'll just toss a few names out here, and then in a moment, Gargus can give us a little bit more context. The writer is Terry Nation, who I understand has a decent-sized role in the history of this era of Doctor Who. And then the overall premise is basically observing the birth of the Daleks and confronting the "would you kill baby Hitler" moral dilemma. Except instead of baby Hitler, it's the Daleks. Except with the imagery, it also kind of is baby Hitler. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But Gargus, why don't you give us just a little bit more context, including what is a Dalek?
Right. So, I mean, if you know Doctor Who, you basically know the Daleks, but as a very, very simple breakdown, they are basically mutated fascists who go around in little personalized tanks looking to take over the universe and exterminate anyone who isn't like them. They tend to talk in a very staccato voice, this sort of thing, putting emphasis on every other word. Usually done through a Bing modulator, so it sounds better than that. They've been the Doctor's arch enemies ever since their first appearance in the very second serial, all the way back in 1963. And Terry Nation's their creator and wrote the majority of their appearances through the 60s and 70s.
They look like Star Wars droids, like evil trash cans that shoot lasers and say exterminate a lot.
They're R2-D2s that are Heiling Hitler all the time. They got one arm sticking out.
Yes, the popular saying over in Britain is that they're fascist pepper pots with a sink plunger on.
That does give you an image, yeah. Yeah. So, what else should we know before we dive into the story, Gargus?
Well, some backstory on how this came to be is that the Daleks had actually been out of Doctor Who for a good while. Back in the mid-60s, Terry Nation had decided that he'd done basically all he could with them, wanted to pitch them as a TV series over in America. So due to the way that the BBC's licensing and copywriting process for scripts went, he held the rights to use them however he liked. So Doctor Who went without Daleks for 5 years while he tried and failed to get that done. And they'd had a serial each of the 3 seasons prior to this, which I actually rewatched them myself to confirm my suspicions about them. And yeah, they kind of hold up. It kind of holds up my belief that the Daleks weren't really coming into Genesis in a very good place. You know, Day of the Daleks wasn't even supposed to have them. They were just jammed in at the last minute to celebrate their coming back, and the story doesn't really do them justice. They don't even look all that good because the props have degraded badly. Land of the Daleks handles them better. It's a nice adventure story, but it also has the feel of Terry Nation basically running their greatest hits without really giving them all that much to do. And then the one before this, Death to the Daleks, kind of has an interesting setup of, oh, maybe the Doctor will have to work with the Daleks. But then that gets nullified real quickly, and it spends most of its time on a whole lot of nonsense that's not particularly entertaining. So the outgoing producer and script editor for the show, Barry Letts and Terrence Dix, had commissioned Terry Nation to do another Dalek serial because even if they're not turning out super great, they're the Daleks. They bring in the viewers. Everyone likes them. And it's never really come out what exactly his initial pitch was, but they've said in interviews that they looked at him and said, Terry, this is just the same Dalek story you've given us 3 times already. So they prompted him, why don't you go back and do a story about the creation of the Daleks, the genesis of the Daleks? And he was getting that together. And while he was doing that, the production management of the show actually turned over. It was given to new incoming producer Philip Hinchcliffe and new script editor Robert Holmes, both of whom had much darker, more violent, and thematically intense interest in where to take the show.
So, I guess one thing that we haven't explicitly said is that this serial is generally very well regarded. On the Wikipedia page, it said it often shows up in the top 3 or 5 favorites among fans in the whole run of the Doctor Who series of series. You know, along with the one that Brian mentioned, Blink, or whatever it's called, about the Weeping Angels, which I have seen. But would you say that's fair? This is generally regarded as an achievement?
Yes, there are very few classic Doctor Who serials I think are regarded on a level as this. I think the only 2 or 3 that I think you could get fans to agree upon are at this height would be John Pertwee's Inferno, Peter Davison's The Caves of Androzani, and Sylvester McCoy's Remembrance of the Daleks. So this is easily top 5, usually top 3.
Okay, so we're kind of getting a slightly darker, slightly more serious, slightly more violent take on the Daleks. One question, and maybe there's not an easy answer to this. Are the Daleks supposed to be silly? Are they supposed to make the audience like kind of laugh, like, oh, there's the goofy trash cans that shout, exterminate a whole lot? Like, there's an inherent hamminess to them, right?
Yes, I mean, you know, the very first appearance, they don't properly show up until the 2nd episode. And the cliffhanger on it is like one of the companions wandering around their city, and all of a sudden she pushes herself against the wall because she's being menaced by something, and all the audience sees is a sink plunger coming slowly towards her. So I think there's definitely supposed to be that element of they are a little silly. It's kind of unavoidable when they originated with early 60s television sci-fi. But I think it's also supposed to be a thing of they do look silly until you really start getting into the storytelling with them and you realize, oh no, these things may be a bit silly, but they are actually serious about their goals and capable of achieving it if you give them the rope to.
Okay.
Also, they roll around on tiny little wheels, so there's discourse over whether they can be defeated by something as simple as a staircase. Or even just having to go off-road. It's like wheels are only useful in a civilization where you got roads and flat surfaces.
which was initially supposed to be a thing with them. Like, their initial appearance had it said that they could only survive within the confines of this city where the floors were all powered by static electricity. Work out how that happens. But, their second appearance was the Dalek invasion of Earth. So you gotta put them on the streets of London and you gotta say, okay, these guys can just go wherever they like and they can be threatening to you anywhere. Bah.
What they had me thinking of is Yerks from Animorphs. Did either of you read Animorphs?
No. Are they which one are the Yerks?
Okay, so the Yerks, Gargus, did you read Animorphs?
I did, not enough to be super into it, but I have friends who are, so I kind of know what a yerk is, but not entirely.
Okay, so a yerk is a slug, and in its normal form, it can't really do anything, but it can crawl into the brains of other creatures and pilot their bodies around. And when it's in a body, it can speak and it can do, like, it's a sentient being. But left to its devices, it can't really do anything until it has a host. And they very well could have just lifted that from the Daleks, because these, as we learn about them, they're like squids, I guess, in wheelchairs. I thought, from my outside perspective before watching this, I thought they were just robots. But no, they have got a little squid pilot on the inside.
Yeah, and that is a big thing with them, is that, they honestly believe themselves to be the master race in the universe, and everything that's not like them should die. But they're just these helpless little amorphous squid-like things that need their personalized tanks to go around and conquer the universe. So they're kind of pathetic in that way, right up until they've got you in their sights.
So I think I'm ready to dive into it. I think we have the context. Addicted to context, is that right, Brian?
Right.
So the first part, again, it's 6 parts. We kind of arrive with the 4th Doctor on this planet, and someone in like a cloak immediately approaches the Doctor, and I think we are to take that he's some other super sentient time being, perhaps a more powerful or a more in control one.
Yeah, he's like his boss, his middle manager.
Yeah. So for context, it's like the Doctor usually arrives on a planet in his ship, the TARDIS, the whole police box that's bigger on the inside thing. That's not happening in this story because season 12 technically only constitutes one journey in the TARDIS, which, takes place in like the second serial, The Ark in Space. The second one, they take at the end of that one, they take a transmat beam down to Earth and have a whole adventure with the Sontarans. And they're supposed to take a transmat beam back to the location to get to the TARDIS and go home. But they're intercepted by the Time Lords here and thrown onto Skaro because, as happened a few times in this period, the Time Lords have decided they had a mission for the Doctor, in this case to destroy the Daleks back at their genesis.
Gotcha. And so the Doctor is ordered, go kill baby Hitler so Hitler doesn't become a thing. Except it's the Daleks.
Give them a few options. They say if you can't kill them, at least make them not so violent.
Right. Yeah. And because there's no TARDIS, it's got this time ring. It's more, it looks like he wore it on his wrist, maybe. And I don't know, I guess a ring just describes the shape. It doesn't have to be on a finger.
It made me think of, in some time travel stories, like I think this is in Time After Time, and it's definitely in the Michael Crichton story Timeline, that like, because if you have a time machine that you can use all the time, it defeats a lot of the stakes of your story. It's like, oh, well, I'll go back 5 minutes before I made that mistake. So good dramatic stakes to make your time machine only be there sometimes.
Yeah.
And so in some of these stories, there's like a thing that you hold on to that's like it's like your phone you can use to call your Uber. And it's like once the party's done, once you've achieved your mission, then you can reunite with your time machine.
Yeah, the show usually gets around that problem by the dual rules of the Doctor can't really cross his own personal time stream or avert things once he's gotten involved. And in the cases when that may be on the table because things are too severe, the Doctor isn't very good at piloting his ship, and there's no guarantee he'll be able to take it where he wants to, or even get back to this place once he takes off. But even that's off the table for this story with the time ring on play.
Right. So the time ring is kind of identified as you need to hold on to this thing or things are going to go bad for you. It's kind of just another item here that's going to raise the stakes a little bit. He's got to hold on to this by the time the serial concludes. And
yeah, because they've dropped him on the planet Skaro at the end of the 1,000-year blood war between the Khalids and the Thals. So the implication is kind of, you do your mission, or else you're stuck here. You're going down with everyone else.
So Khalids and Thals. It's like this massive war between two humanoid I guess they're humans. Maybe not. I don't know. They look like people. They're played by human actors. Civilizations. So we see a lot of them. And the Thals, are they the blonde ones?
Initially, they were when they were introduced in the Daleks' initial serial, and you didn't see what the Daleks are like. But yeah, they're the blonde ones, generally in green, who are nominally the good guys in this conflict. A heavy emphasis on nominally.
Yeah, and I think this is that's the subject of inspection of this serial to at least some extent. The Khalids, which you will notice is a very simple anagram for Dalek, they're the group that's tied with the Daleks. They're not the Daleks themselves, but I understand through lore that is the civilization, the group tied with the Daleks, and we will see here that is in fact the case.
Yeah.
And then there's this third group called the Mutos, and they're kind of the refugees, the scarred mutant refugees, and they have their own issues going on. They don't like normal people. So they're not just refugees. They have their own like rules and norms and stuff too. So we kind of have three groups going on here.
I think the implication is that since this started out as a nuclear conflict ages back, the Mutos are the result of what's happened to both the Khalids and the Thals, who were caught in the fire and have mutated outside the bounds of their race.
Okay. So they're like the nuclear fallout victims. Gotcha.
Yes. And I say started as nuclear because this has been going on for so long that they've basically been reduced from nuclear exchanges with laser weapons down to laying, old-fashioned landmines.
Right, and that's something they talk about for a while. It's kind of the thing of, I know not what weapons World War III will be fought with, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. And so they've got all different levels of tech. I did think it was weird that the very first thing that this sidekick of the Doctor says is, well, they're using gas masks and radiation suits. Those don't go together. And it's like, well, I mean, you could use chemical weapons and nuclear weapons. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. Like, we definitely still have way more powerful chemical weapons than existed in World War I.
Yeah. Yeah, this is basically if World War III started and then bled into World Wars 4, 5, 6, and so on.
I will say, for me, one problem was I'm kind of a dummy. I like if you're gonna be with a group, you need to have a specific color to your shirt or something like that, so that I always know who you are and who you're allegiant to.
It would be really helpful if one group was, say, pink and the other group was green.
We talked about this, and that's a Zombies reference, in case that wasn't as immediately obvious to everyone as it was to me. Cheerleaders versus zombies. In that one that we talked with Gavin about way back in the day, Destiny, it had this group of rebels, and they just conveniently all wore green shirts. It was very helpful. Anytime a guy showed up with a green shirt, I was like, oh, I know who you are, buddy. And it always worked out that way. So I was hoping for a little bit of that because I sometimes got confused, particularly because, not to spoil what happens throughout this entire serial, but it's a lot of like getting captured by one group and escaping and then getting captured either by the same group again or by the opposite group. Lots of captures and escapes throughout this 6-part serial here.
Also, there's double agent stuff going on. So there's people betraying their people and going to work with the other people. Also, they live in model domes, like a little miniature set of a dome. And I'm pretty sure both groups live under the same model dome.
No, that's 2 domes. You can tell when you're in one dome or the other because one has white walls and the other has gold walls.
There you go. Okay.
Okay. But one thing that Brian said, I don't think we've actually talked through yet, is this notion of companions, which is another important Doctor Who concept. There's always humans, actual humans, not Time Lords, but humans who accompany Doctor Who get to be the Luke Skywalker character. Well, Mr. Jedi, what does this thing mean? And like providing a human perspective on these very supernatural concepts. And then there's often they're going through their own arcs and relationships with the doctors and stuff, at least from the little bits that I've seen. But here we have 2 companions. I don't know if there's always 2 companions, but they include a man and a woman. And I think you wrote down their names somewhere here in our notes, Gargus, but do you just want to introduce them for us?
Yeah, we have Elizabeth Sladen as Sarah Jane Smith, the intrepid reporter who'd forced herself onto the TARDIS in the previous season with John Pertwee and decided to stick on with Tom Baker once he regenerated because she was just having such a good time hanging out with him, bebopping around time and space, getting to do some snooping into things more interesting than local politics. And we have Harry Sullivan, who's basically a bit of a, dim-witted good old boy army surgeon who wound up climbing aboard the TARDIS during its trip in the start of the season and is having himself not the best time in the world, but he's military, he's British, he's keep a stiff upper lip about it.
And so pretty early on, I think it's actually in this part 1, we kind of get an overview. Here's the state of the world. Here's the groups, the 3 groups we care about. Here's the mission. First of all, keep your important time ring and go stop the Daleks. So that's kind of all part 1 gets to do. But I think they do get separated. So Sarah gets separated from the Doctor and Harry.
Dan, we've talked before about ways you wouldn't want to die. I would really not want to be in a gas attack.
Yeah,
that's up there for me. Sounds like no good.
Yeah, I think that is reasonable. I would agree with that assessment.
Yeah, it does also sort of serve as this serial's reestablishment of this Doctor's particular personality, which I often see described as very bohemian. He's not the sort to take danger very seriously. They've got him going through a whole, gunpoint, turn out your pockets sort of thing, and he just spends several seconds putting out dozens and dozens of random junk items on. He's making fun of the military commanders and the fact that they're all very young men with a very inflated sense of self-importance. So it gives you a good idea of, who he is and how he's going to be handling this sort of situation, especially as it as this one just keeps getting worse and worse as it goes on.
And then I think it's towards the end of part 1, and then throughout the rest of the parts, that we meet who is certainly the most memorable character of this serial. Maybe the most interesting character. Interesting is subjective. And this is this fella. The fella is no good. His name is Davros. Davros, how do you pronounce it? I forget.
Davros.
Davros. Okay. And Brian, let's hear your take on what this guy looks like.
Okay, so he's a monster mash. I think that's how Red Letter Media describes Emperor Palpatine, and I just kept thinking Emperor Palpatine looking at this guy. But what I messaged Dan about was he was also giving me Dagda vibes from Max Magician, where he's this guy who's basically got a big orc green prosthetic forehead pasted on top of his head. I think he also has one middle eye. Like, his two human eyes are pasted over, and he's got one eye staring out of the prosthetic forehead.
He's kind of Stephen Hawking meets SS Nazi imagery, like all black, because he's riding around in this little cart like he's a Dalek. And I don't even know if they explicitly say it or not, but like what we're supposed to take away is like the Daleks are in the image of this guy. Yeah. So he's kind of their god.
Yeah, it's like his wheelchair is shaped the exact same as the lower half of a Dalek, but there's also the thing of like he's only got one good arm, the other's crippled, and that sort of mirrors the fact that the Daleks only have the plunger to manipulate things. His eyes have been seared shut, so he's only got this one electronic eye on his forehead. So the implication is kind of when he was developing the Daleks, he took inspirations from his own crippled state in order to make the way that they look.
And I thought it was pretty funny that he introduces the first Dalek pretty soon here, and he's got this group of goons who listen to what he says, and he's like, "So, what do you think of my transport model number 3? And Doctor Who says, "That's a Dalek." And he's like, "Well, that's a good name for it." Kind of a Chuck Berry moment.
It's your cousin, Marvin Berry.
You know that new robot you've been looking for?
So, just where my head is now, as we're watching this, I'm definitely expecting this to be some sort of predestination type story. But I think I'm like a little ahead of where people were in the 60s. Like, I don't think that was like one of the default time travel stories yet. But we do get little bits of it, I would say. It doesn't fulfill exactly what my expectations were at this point, but there's some surprises along the way.
Yeah, the introduction to the first Dalek is the cliffhanger for the first episode. You get into episode 2, and you also get into Sarah being captured by the Mudos, and then that group of Mudos very shortly after, where you start to get the idea of like, oh, there's not really any good guys in this conflict either.
I did think that was interesting. And I always find that an interesting perspective in films when you have the good guys aren't quite so good as you think. And so like everybody's just kind of looking out for their own interests and has their own warped views that they apply on the world that essentially expect you to agree with their worldview, you know? And I thought that was pretty interesting, honestly. One of the more interesting things going on here.
And especially since it's sort of presented to us as Sarah and the Mudos have to help the fans put together a rocket that they mean to fire at the Khaled Dome. And it's using this incredibly deadly substance that has some made-up sci-fi name that I can't remember. It's basically going to kill them as they transport it from the boxes into the rocket. I put down on my notes, it's kind of reminiscent of that one scene in Chernobyl where they're trying to clear off the roof, except they're kind of all expected to just get through it and die a very horrible, painful thing.
Right, so there's a whole Cold War thing going on here. It really reminded me of the Butter Battle book by Dr. Seuss, where it's like the groups are equivalent and interchangeable, and they've both come up with nuclear weapons, or something similar to nuclear weapons, and the big moment is approaching. And I did really love the name of whatever the radiation poisoning stand-in is. It's like dendronic toxemia.
This is also where we discover that the Daleks are, at least nominally, Davros's projection of the machines that will be necessary as the Khalids mutate into a helpless future form, which I'm not sure that's how mutations work. I don't think you can exactly project a random scrambling of genes, but I'm not the Nazi super scientist here, so what do I know?
I was curious about that process where he's like, "Trust me, guys, squids are the new thing." It's like, how'd you get there? Where did these squids come from? How did you arrive at this point? But I guess we learn later that he's experimented on various animals, so maybe the squid form works best if you're making xenophobic R2-D2s.
Yeah, I guess the idea is that like the Khalids and the Thals are both mutating as a result from their war, hence the Mudos. But Davros has been trying to nudge that process in order to create a very specific sort of final outcome that he intends not to be like what the Khalids will evolve into, but to completely replace the Khalids for his own ambitions.
And so we also start to see some of these ideological clashes. There's like a scientist who is starting to see through Davros's like I guess power hungry at the cost of some life now. Is like, I don't know, I was thinking it was going to push even harder this idea that what Davros's goal is like kind of the basic nuclear question, which is like, if you have the biggest gun, does that make the biggest deterrent? And we get a little bit of that, but that isn't like the main wedge that Davros uses to try and convince everyone. But that's certainly like a dynamic at play here. And some of the scientists are starting to say, well, maybe that's not a good idea to make like the most dangerous, powerful robot trash can that shoots lasers that we possibly can.
Yeah, I think that the main theme that fascism will, given enough time to run amongst to pursue its goals, will eventually start to eat itself.
Mm-hmm. Because that is pretty interesting. Basically, like, I found that actually resonant, and I'm in the middle of editing our episode of discussing Inherit the Wind, and we talk some about like how, boy, this sure sounds like some things that are happening in the headlines today. And there were a handful of times here I was like, boy, that sure sounds like some rhetoric that some people are using in headlines today to justify what's going on out there. And I think that's a good take, Gargus, that is kind of the overriding theme, that like little bits of fascism turn into big bits of fascism unless brave moral people stand up.
Well, I even think that this is like big fascism is here. Big fascism has had its way. And now that big fascism is out of enemies, the only other enemies left to keep it running are other fascists.
Right. And we'll get to how this kind of ironically folds in on itself by the end of the story.
Yeah, part 2 really gives you like, the good guys aren't really so good. There's some people in the bad guys who aren't as bad as you think. Sarah Jane tries to escape with the Mudos. There's a bit of a questionable cliffhanger. I like most of the cliffhangers here, but that freeze frame when she falls from the rocket scaffolding isn't very good, is it?
Let's talk about the cliffhangers. This was the silliest one. It's like, oh no, she's gonna fall. And then part 3 is like, oh, she fell, but she's okay. Or like, oh, it's like she landed on something. It's like, it feels like you need a little more than that as like the payoff to your cliffhanger.
That was the biggest one for me. Was she fell like 3 feet and landed on a lower rung of the ladder, and immediately another character says, "Are you okay?" She says, "Yes." Oh, all right. Well,
whew.
I was wondering, what was the time gap between episodes of this thing? Did you just have to wait till tomorrow, or did you have to wait a week for that?
This was weekly. So they left you on that awkward freeze frame for 7 days.
Oh no, she's fallen from the ladder. And then all week you're thinking, oh dear, what's going to happen when she falls down from the ladder? And then episode 3 starts and it's like, oh, okay, good. Well, so there was a rung right down there that she could land on. That's a relief.
It also turns out to be for nothing because they just get captured at the start of the next episode again and don't get out until the Doctor saves them at the end of part 3.
A lot of getting captured, and I think probably somewhat intentionally it all kind of runs together. Like who's capturing who? It's like everybody's oppressing everybody. That's how a means of scrambling for control. But there's also this business about like Davros. There's like handing over a super weapon or something like that. Like there's this rocket that they're building or something. And I got confused who was shooting who.
Basically, the Doctor and Harry get help from some of the scientists in order to smuggle their way out of the Khalid Dome and into the Thal Dome in order to... I'm getting turned around now, damn it. Doctor and Harry escape captivity, and they alert the Khaled leaders to what's going on. Davros and his assistant Nider, who's a very Herman Goring type, they get into their heads that the leadership amongst the Khalids is starting to turn against them. So Davros smuggles himself out to the Thal Dome at the same time as the Doctor and Harry are trying to go over there to broker peace, and tells them, hey, my people are looking to completely wipe you out. Here's a chemical formula you can put into your rocket in order to completely wipe my people out, so you guys can be safe and we can have peace. Because Davros is nothing but an underhanded turncoat. He'll basically sell out his own people if it means holding on to his personal petty amount of power.
I was thinking about how this was back in 1975, so back before Star Wars. And as far as having a lot of like the SS uniforms and certain things, some of the elements of the design were like a cheaper Star Wars.
Yeah. In fact, some of that even goes away after episode 3 because they were getting complaints about the Khalids being too Nazi-like.
Interesting.
Like, you pay attention, they stop doing their little faux Nazi salute. They get rid of the iron crosses on their shirts.
So, was that kind of novel to like make it that direct, to use that imagery so strongly?
Yes, I mean, when the Daleks first appeared in 1963, it was like, parallels to the Nazis in terms of thought and behavior, making it so explicit that their pre-Dalek selves were, just dressed up as goose-stepping SS officers. That was new for the show, yes. I don't know about new for British television. I'm pretty sure that, you saw Nazis on the TV all the time because of historical dramas and whatnot.
Right.
For the show, this was a new thing.
1975. So that means it's 30 years after the end of World War II, which would be, like, for now, would be 1995. So it's like only a little bit further away than like 9/11 is for us now. It's always weird to do those kinds of comparisons. The one that got me today is the song 1985 is now further away from us than it was from the year 1985.
When did that song come out?
It was like 2004 or something like that. So we just passed it recently.
I know of that song because the lead singer of Bowling for Soup, who I think his name is Jared Reddick, he is currently the voice of Chuck E. Cheese. And he sings a song with the Chuck E. Cheese band called In the Future, and they make a reference to 2085.
I've also put down for my part in the notes, I have in the parentheses here, can't forget the clam. Everyone loves the clam. I will not forgive us if we forget the clam.
So let's do some clam talk, fellas. How are we feeling about the clam? What is the clam, and how are we feeling about the clam?
I liked the clam.
Okay, tell us about the clam, Brian.
All right, so as they're inspecting, I mean, there's a lot of back and forth, but at one point they're investigating the lab where Davros has been doing his experiments, and it like leads into a cave, and he's done tests on a variety of species, and the next thing we see is, I think Harry, he even has a joke, he's like, I always put my foot in it, because he's got a giant clam gnawing on his foot.
Request to have Brian do the rest of the episode in that voice.
It's not even that far off from how Ian Marther sounds is the funny thing.
What kind of throws me off sometimes is like, they'll just, I think it's a Britishism, but I also think there's some quirk to this show probably, but like, they'll just say things deadpan that it's like, you should have a little more emote to what you're saying right now, buddy. Or like, he'll just like, it's almost like he has less of a filter in what he says. And like, I don't know, I feel like the Doctor is very open about, like, isn't there a thing where you don't want to reveal stuff about the future if you're a time traveler? Is that a theme that the show investigates a lot?
It sometimes does, it sometimes doesn't. It's just very surprising to me how ready the Doctor is to say, oh, hello, I'm here to help avoid the terrible future that's going to happen if this current course of events continues.
It seems like that'd be a no-no if you're doing some time travel ethics, you know?
I guess when the guys who like run time tell you to do something, you kind of have to bend the rules a little bit to get the job done.
I did like that at the start his time boss says, "So we think you should go back and kill baby Hitler." And the doctor's like, "Well, what if I don't want to?" And the boss says, "Well, we've already put you there." It's like, in fact, you're not even on your ship anymore. You're on the planet in the time you need to be, so just go do your job, dude.
But the reason I brought it up is because, yeah, like sometimes they would be in danger and they'd just be like, I'm in it now, man. Isn't that annoying? It's like, you might die. Like, you could be a little more worked up than that. But yeah, with his foot in the clam.
Like these the three serials before this are kind of all taking place in the same trip. These are all like running together from the same day. Harry's having himself an awful time of it. I think he kind of has to be a bit deadpan, or otherwise he's just going to start screaming.
I think that's fair. I think when you've seen some stuff, it all becomes relative.
But my favorite Letterboxd review of this says Davros really should have continued his clam research.
That would have been a twist if like all future Daleks are clams now.
I mean, like the iconic Doctor Who monsters, a pepper shaker with a plunger on. Who's to say he can't fight a giant clam?
Excuse me.
Yeah, end of this episode, the Doctor's trying to disarm the missile so that the files don't, kill all the Khaleds. Because, even though he's trying to avert the Daleks' creation, he's not going to try and, cause a genocide of innocent people. But he gets knocked into an electric fence, which is a pretty violent cliffhanger, all told, I think. One of those things where I'm pretty sure Mary Whitehouse would have strongly objected to it back in the day.
Can you explain that a little more?
Mary Whitehouse was basically a moral guardian busybody who, among many anti-sex, anti-queer campaigns back in the 70s and 80s, always had her eye on Doctor Who and was constantly complaining about the levels of violence on the show as inappropriate for its tea time slot. She eventually even got the upper production crew fired for going a bit too far a few seasons from now. Cliffhanger where the Doctor's grappling with someone and he winds up getting his head plunged in the water, and the cliffhanger is him just, lying there as he very gradually goes still. A little bit intense for something that goes out at 5:15 in the afternoon with kids watching.
That's true, although the counterpoint to that is all of the violence in this is like, we're going to flicker a light off and on, and that means somebody died, which is fine. Like, it doesn't really diminish it from it, but like, it's intense because like it immerses you in it, but like it's not gory. It's not like limbs are falling off and blood spurting or anything.
No. This was my favorite thing. The way that the Daleks kill people, although they'll usually yell exterminate, but then they shoot their ray, which is the lights flicker on and off, the colors like get inverted, and the actors have to scream. They go, "Ah!" and flail around and writhe. And anytime that happened, I was very on board. I really liked that.
What do you think the biological symptom is? What's happening like under the skin, under the hood there, Brian?
Oh, it's probably bad. Your blood is probably boiling.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts? What's happening to you when the light switch rave happens?
I don't know. Like, I feel like if your blood was actually boiling, then like it would shoot out your nose or something like that. I don't know. It's like, maybe like their ray like sends signals across all your nerves and tells your body to shut down, but feel immense pain in the short term.
Yeah, that's true, because you're being hurt, so it's not quite like Avada Kedavra where the lights just go off inside you. I think maybe it's like the metaphysical equivalent of putting a spider in a cup and carrying it outside. That's what happens to your soul when the Dalek beam happens.
Yeah, I forget if it was on the show or some expanded universe thing, but I think it is basically canon. The Daleks have tuned their death ray to be as painful as physically possible as it kills you. Because they're sadists.
Why would they only turn it up to 7 when they could turn it up to 10 on the painometer?
Oh, they're from a British property. They can turn it up to 11 if they like.
Oh, good point. That new technology they invented. And I've actually never seen Spinal Tap.
Just saying, but you gotta know this goes to 11.
Of course, that's of course, yeah.
So there's part 4 we're on now.
And I think, let's see. So what are the? I'm trying to remember. It does run together. So let's see what happens in part 4 here. So
the missile goes off and it goes down on the college city, and a whole bunch of characters die on the screen, including implicitly the Doctor's companions.
Right, because there was a thing where the Doctor said, "Oh no, the Thals are in danger." So, or no, I guess was it the Collins at this point?
Yes.
Yeah, whoever is about to get hit by the missile, they're in danger. Harry and Sarah go tell them. It's like, what? You're gonna send them to the city that's about to get nuked? That doesn't seem like a good idea. And then he's like, "Oh no, they got nuked." It's like, what?
oh, rats! Darn it! And it does kind of ramp up the nuclear wasteland imagery a little bit here at this point. Even though I guess, is it a nuke? Yeah, it is a nuke, right? They just call it a missile or a rocket or something.
I guess it was supposed to be a chemical attack because it had a special formula.
Oh yeah, right. Engorkification or whatever it's called. What was it, Brian? Do you remember?
Toxemia is what it causes, but it did have some special name that they weren't straight up calling it a nuclear warhead, but that's what it was.
I had it in mind. Dystronic toxemia.
Dystronic. Gotta beware the dystronic toxemia. That sounds like a bad place. If a doctor said you have dystronic toxemia, I'm making sure my will's up to date.
You're done. You're cooked.
Yeah, the Thals are all hailing Davros as the great peacemaker, the one who helped their side win the war by turning against his people, and then he sends the Daleks in.
Yeah, so now they're just rolling around, zapping things willy-nilly. Starting to get a little power crazy.
Yeah. So one side commits genocide and then immediately starts experiencing a genocide of its own.
Right.
The Doctor's at least, his friends are dead. The colleagues are basically all dead except for the ones down in the scientific military bunker. The Thals are being taken out, but he's still got to complete his mission, so he at least tries to rally the Thals to team up with the Mudos in order to fight against the Daleks while he tries to get back in and stop the Daleks from going any further.
Right, so we've had one major attack. This is being the nuke. And now the Daleks are the next threat. So we're like, well, we gotta tamp that one down. Except, I forget, how is it revealed that the companions actually survived?
The Doctor's sneaking back into the Khaled bunker, and he just meets them. It's not exactly a very dramatic moment.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of makes sense because they're like, well, the missile got here before we did.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's in the same episode, so it's not really dragged out too long.
Even so, 10 minutes when you're a 20-minute program, that's, aimed at least partially at children. That's quite a while to pretend that several of your protagonists have died in a nuclear exchange.
Right.
But either way, the surviving scientists do try to plot against Davros because they realize, oh, he's insane.
So that's a major theme of the rest of this whole second half thing is the people on Davros' side are like, hold up a second. Maybe really kind of organizing against him and trying to institute democracy to stop him and such. And so how does what's the cliffhanger from the 4th to the 5th? Oh, this is the one where the Doctor is captured, right? And they're like, we're going to make you reveal all the secrets.
Which again, you really shouldn't be talking about the fact that you're from the future and what you're trying to do. This cliffhanger would not happen if Davros didn't know that the Doctor knows what happens to the Daleks in the future.
Right. We learned from Back to the Future that if you know what's going to happen in the future, you hold all the cards at that point. So everybody's going to want to leverage that. And yeah, so Davros is like, I'm not going to torture you. I'm going to torture your companions. And they're like, don't give him the secrets. Don't tell him the secrets. And then he's like, all right, I'm going to tell you the secrets. And then he just starts listing them out.
Only after the cliffhanger. You have to wait a week with the companions being tortured before you find out that the Doctor gives in.
Right. And he really spells it out in detail. And I was wondering, this was actually something I was unsure of. Is this references to past episodes, or is this made up stuff?
One of them is all. The others, I do not think were specific references to anything. They're just kind of a vague idea that the Doctors met and fought the Daleks many, many times.
Gotcha. And so most of this part 5 is kind of setting up the climax that's going to happen in part 6. So the Doctor gets free.
Well, before he gets free, he has a like verbal confrontation with them.
Oh, right.
He tries
Yeah.
to appeal to his better nature, which I think is often hailed as one of the two moments from this that really make it a classic of the series. And he's asking Davros if instead of the Daleks, he created an incredibly deadly virus that was guaranteed to kill absolutely everything on contact, wipe out all life in the universe. Would he allow its use? And Davros just very slowly builds up from like whispering about how he would absolutely do it and building and building and building to how it's going to make him the most powerful creature in the universe. It's a testament to how good Michael Wisher is in the part that his face is completely and totally obscured by the mask. He really only has his voice to work with, and he sells that scene like nothing else.
Right. Yeah. I did like this. I liked it when the Doctor... Well, I kind of liked it whenever we had Davros. I thought he was fun, and he had a lot of character. And I kind of like really understood directly what his purpose was, where sometimes the different factions kind of blurred together for me. And I just thought he was a fun presence. And like, so when he was bantering with the Doctor, or not bantering's not the right word, when he was having these like intense conversations with the Doctor, particularly this one here, that I can see why that stuck with people.
Yeah, Wisher only played Davros in this serial. Every other time they've brought the character back, it's a different actor, and I think he is still the gold standard to beat for it. I really like how they have the effect on his voice where the more excited and agitated he gets, the more he sounds like a regular Dalek.
Yeah, I picked up on that he was like the voice of them. Or, yeah, when he would yell. He just seems to really enjoy what he's doing. He very much has a Palpatine vibe.
He's in the mood.
Yeah, the Doctor does escape and starts plotting against Davros. The Resistance is coming in. They're fighting against the Daleks, keeping them busy, giving the Doctor a chance to go to the incubation chamber where Davros has been keeping his, like, final prototype for the creatures that are going to drive the Dalek machines around, and decides that he's going to, like, get C4 and basically blow them up.
And so when the Doctor gets free, now, yeah, he's going to... his way of striking back at Davros is, like, turning off the ventilation tube that's keeping him going. So he's kind of, whatever condition Davros has, he needs like the machinery to keep his lungs pumping or whatever.
Speaking of things that you really shouldn't tell your enemy, it's like, that switch controls my entire life support system. Maybe don't tell him that.
And so they kind of have this back and forth. He's like, you wouldn't press it. And the Doctor's like, would I? And then he starts to press it. He's like, don't press it. Well, then call it all off. And he's like, okay, I'll call it off. And then he calls it off. And he's like, now say no undoing. Make sure you tell them you can't undo this order. And Davros is about to say, no undoing. But then someone come and clocks the Doctor. And then, so instead of saying no undoing, Davros says, actually, immediate undo. Forget what I just said. We're back to normal. I like that like you can make an order that you can't change the order.
Yeah.
I feel like you can't do that. Like, no one order should be able to supersede. It's like, why is that one order more powerful than the others? But I guess you could say that.
What it made me think of was in Doctor Strangelove, they have the code that forbids countermanding. It's like it scrambles all the communication systems so that nobody can issue an order that countermands it. But here it was kind of silly. It was like no tagbacks.
We have 25 minutes and it's family tea time. You gotta accept a few deviations from reality.
You can't double stamp a triple stamp. That's from Dumb and Dumber. Anyways.
I do want to make specific mention of like Peter Miles as Neither as being a really good one. Especially when Davros here is making clear his intention to surrender and Neither is having a moment of like, are you insane? Are you just giving up? And Davros, basically just tells him to have faith.
So, I mean, we know where it's all headed. My curiosity, both for Brian as a first-time watcher and then Gargus as a repeated watcher, to what extent do you think Davros is actually having internal moral dilemmas, or is it merely tactical dilemmas? Like, how do I get out of this and continue my plan of world domination? Or is he actually thinking, like, maybe I don't want to create super powerful evil robots?
Oh, I thought he just wanted this all the time.
So he never doubted or hesitated. It was all like a tactical and working through it.
I think, if anything, hearing the Doctor say these things are gonna destroy the universe just made him more hyped to do it. Davros was like, hell yes.
My machines are badass. That's what you're thinking he's saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that the Doctor unintentionally made Davros worse. Like he already had his designs and like having his own little personal army of perfect monsters who can kill anyone he likes and consolidate his power all he wants. But hearing that in the future they go on to become one of the most feared creatures in the universe, and the Doctor challenging him with that moral dilemma of, if you made something that was guaranteed to kill everything, would you use it? Just kind of made him really examine it in his head and come out deciding, actually, fuck yes, I would do this, and I'd be happy to do it. He's very screwed up like that.
What's the last cliffhanger now?
The cliffhanger is actually he's in the incubator room laying the charges, and then he stumbles out with one of the Dalek creatures wrapped around his throat.
And I just want to say it explicitly one more time, because it took a while for me to click on this. The incubator of the little creatures are in fact the Daleks, but the robots that we see are controlled by the little creatures that we see. So if he goes and he kills the creatures, even though he's not killing the robot machinery, that actually wipes out. That's like the heart of where the Daleks are at this phase of their evolution.
Especially because the creatures are the things that Davros has been genetically conditioning to only know hatred and disdain.
Right.
Even though the machines will remain and the college will, like the surviving college, will likely mutate into something like the Daleks. Again, don't know how you project that, but I guess you do. Even if they do mutate into those forms, they won't be the things that Davros has genetically conditioned to be the Daleks. So kill the little things in the incubator room, and you have basically wiped out the Daleks. But, it's not as bad as like the falling one, but it is a little bit. Oh no, the Doctor's being strangled. What's he gonna do? You just pull it off next time.
Right.
But it does lead into what's considered, like, I think, the iconic scene where Tom Baker's got the two wires necessary to spark the charge, and he just starts wondering, do I have the right to do this?
Right. So a couple things here. One is, yes, the premise is he puts the wires together that kills all the Dalek little monster guys. And so now here's a big ethical dilemma. This is the real pondering point. Would you wipe out an entire, not just a person, but a community, a race, in the name of the greater good? A, and B, I just want to call out, I like that it's a visual thing. You got to put the wires together. This serial's got a lot of like, here's the big red button you got to smash for the bad thing to happen. Here's the knob you have to turn for the jolts to get you. Very visual cues for the things that are happening. And yeah, so I liked that it was the wires being put together.
It's a great directorial decision, too, because it really lets you get up close and personal with Tom Baker's face as he works through this moral dilemma. And he does make some good points that's like, even if the Daleks are a terror to the universe, good things may happen from the fact that that terror exists. It's sort of like, the Nazis did horrible things, the Holocaust happened, but a lot, like, the United Nations came out the other end of that. So it's like, how much are you willing to say saving these lives by destroying the people who killed them in the first place is worth the good that came out of it in the decades and centuries to follow?
I would have been a lot more sympathetic if there was more to the Daleks than driving around trash cans that shout exterminate and shoot lasers. because that's really all we see of them this episode. So it felt a little weighty for what we see of the Daleks. Like, they don't project any complexity that is like worthy of that level of consideration to me here. But like, I don't know, maybe that's the point, is like what we may not see as like the complexity of another species, of another person or organism, may in fact be there, and their very existence might have more value to this world than like the things that we see of them, you know?
Yeah, what you said, Gargus, makes it make a little bit more sense to me. He did mention, like, alliances have happened because of what they end up doing. That, like, the good peoples of the world work together more. But it seemed like more of what he talked about was the idea of, does one person have the power, or should one person have the power to wipe out a whole species, which is something that I've seen, like an episode of Star Trek, that I think in that case it was like a cloud that eats universes or whatever. It's like some kind of living energy field that just floats around eating things, and Kirk has to grapple with, should I stop this creature? It's just an animal. It's just doing what it does. And it's like, dude, just do something. It's like humans have the power to make decisions over and above, you know, cloud creatures or squid creatures. And if you know that it's going to be good to do something, you should probably do it.
I suppose that the problem here is that because he's looking at such a long time scale, like, you know, thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years, even if he's doing this on a mission from the Time Lords, there's really no way of knowing what the consequences are. And a little bit of outside the confines of this episode, but the new series sort of made it clear that coming here and doing this in the first place was a bad idea, because it's characterized as basically the first shot across the bow in the last great time war between the Time Lords and the Daleks, that for a while was characterized as having completely wiped out the Doctor's people. They gave him this mission, and they basically signed their own death warrant hundreds of years down the line. So that sort of gives you an idea of, like, you know, it may be good, you may save all these people, but you can't know every single ripple. It's like saying, oh, what if you go back in time and say, okay, the meteor doesn't hit the planet, the dinosaurs don't die. Maybe if you're sympathetic to the dinosaurs, but maybe they wind up suffering an even greater catastrophe that wipes out all life on Earth. How do you know?
Yeah, it's hard. It's complicated because, like you said, time scale, and man should not be God in general, I guess. But like, if you are given the power of God, I don't know. It's like the trolley problem, you know? Except like on the extreme scale of like obliterating a species, yeah, or like altering the fates of millions of people. I kind of think about that with presidents, irrespective of like current politics. Like, I feel like every president has done good things and has done bad things, and has done lots and lots of good things and lots of bad things, because like they're simply in a position of power and impacting lots and lots of people. So like, go look at the quote unquote best president and the quote unquote worst president. And not to say they're all equal. I don't think that at all. And not to say that all actions are like amoral, where you can't say what the good thing and the bad thing is. But just like, when you're someone who every single choice you make impacts everything, you've probably certainly done some good things and some bad things. And I think it's like, I don't know, it's just hard to wrap your head around. And this is kind of the same idea, but it's like more directly about taking life and stuff, you know?
That's why The Office ages them so terribly.
Yeah.
You've got this sort of dilemma on your mind every single day.
Right.
Of course, in this case, it does wind up being a little bit moot, because one of the scientists comes up and tells the doctor that Davros has surrendered. So he decides to just pull out the wires and not do it.
Right. So there's a lot of like big stakes thing that almost immediately doesn't matter in this this last stretch here. So there's that thing.
This was pretty stupid. So several things here were kind of stupid. This was very stupid, because Davros says, well, all right, I'll surrender, but because you love democracy so much, you gotta let it be put to a vote. And before people vote, you should put all the important people on the planet together in one room.
Yeah, the colleagues aren't very bright. This is their elite scientific group. This is the decision they make. It's like, oh, okay, the inventor of the genocidal hate tank piloted by mutant squids wants us all in one room. I don't see any trouble with this. So, they all get exterminated.
But it's an excuse for a whole bunch of people to go, ah, and shake around while the lights flash. So I liked it.
Yeah.
But it does also spell the end for Davros.
Right. Yeah, he gets hoisted by his own trash can petard.
Yeah, because once all the other scientific elite are left and it's just him left over, he tries to give the Daleks orders. And turns out that now that he's given them their independence and let them make decisions for themselves, they don't want to listen to a non-Dalek, even a non-Dalek who made them.
And then, this is the one that really baffled me. So if I understood what happened correctly, the doctor's like, nah, F that, I'm just going to go bomb him now. So after that whole do I have the right, he's like, nah, I'm just going to go and do it. And he goes and blows them up, but it's like, it's too late. So it doesn't actually stop them. It slows them down. So despite like the weightiness of that contemplation, he gets called into action to basically do it anyways.
There's like a production line that's mentioned. I do not know how the production line works. It's not mentioned before this last episode. But apparently the Daleks decide to turn it on and start making more of themselves, and then the doctor decides, well, I guess the most I can do is destroy the incubator room. And yes, to be honest, I like this story, but I'm not entirely certain what destroying the incubator room does other than like add another explosion to the batch.
So I thought to end things there was kind of silly, because the doctor kind of backtracks. He's like, well, I will blow up the room. And then the other group caves in the tunnel. And then it's like, well, maybe some of the embryos got killed and some of the robots are trapped in a tunnel. And maybe that's enough. Maybe we slowed them down for some period of time. And like, so that leaves me to wonder, did they change the time stream at all? Like they kind of set things up where you wonder, oh, is it going to be that because of what the doctor did, he actually created the Daleks? Like he was always part of the loop all along. Like that's the predestination story. But it's not clear that that's the case. And so did he actually delay their development, and did that change history somehow?
Yeah. That's the story's answer.
My thought was, I was thinking a little bit about that too. And I wondered if it was like the vector was a little bit to the left and then a little bit to the right. It's like, well, by really getting Davros like fired up, he sped up the moving along with the Daleks and their evilness. But then also like he did all that sort of sabotage of all the stuff they need to make their robots and their incubation room and all that or whatever. So that slowed them down. So like maybe it was net zero. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a weakness in the story that it cops out of that thing that it's been building towards for 6 episodes to just sort of go, well, here's an explosion. Maybe it worked. Maybe it didn't. I think it's forgivable because the main thing the final episode is focused on is how, Davros winds up, getting everything he wants and still getting killed by his own creations in the end. The doctor's ultimately not able to do it because he's pinned down by a Dalek and can't touch the wires together. But then the Dalek rolls forward and its body acts as a conduit for the wires, and it's the one that blows up the incubation room. So there's sort of that sense of like, even as the Daleks have killed their creator and taken over, and they're the only power left standing, they're completely uniform, they're unified in their hatred of all non-Dalek life. But even they are going to be subject to that problem of fascists who rule exclusively by iron-fisted power will eventually turn on each other and tear each other apart. I think you can sort of read that into the way that the incubation room gets blown up.
Okay. I kind of see that now that you say that.
Especially since, like, the big climax of the episode isn't the Doctor destroying the incubation room. It's Davros' very over-the-top death.
So, do we actually see him die, or do we just see him, like, get surrounded by Daleks, and it's presumed he died?
Yeah, they were initially meaning to, like, have it, like, there's a final shot of his hand still twitching in his wheelchair. But as the episode's made, he goes to hit the self-destruct button himself, and the Dalek yells,
"Exterminate!"
And they brought him back several times after this, so he's obviously not dead.
I liked how clear the self-destruct button was. That was, like I said before. And that's Genesis of the Daleks. We didn't even talk about there's a couple of loose threads. One was the time ring, which I mentioned at the beginning. It floats around, and eventually he gets it back. Although the thing that made me laugh is he's like, "Oh no, I lost it." Like, did you drop it back there? And he's like, "Oh yes, I just dropped it back there." I think that like throws him off a little bit, but the cadence of it made me laugh a little bit. But he does like lose it and then find it and then lose it and then find it again, which he needs to have it by the end of the episode. He does get it. And then, what happens to the companions here at the end?
They all grab a hold of the time ring and they all spin around in a big circle, and it sends them whirling off into space so they can go back to where they came from and get involved in a kind of crummy adventure with the Cybermen.
All right.
Kind of crummy adventures of the Cybermen's lot, unfortunately.
I don't know. Are Cybermen... What are Cybermen? I guess we don't really need to know. I guess that's another Doctor Who monster, right?
It's another robot thing. They're as tall as normal humans. They look like people. But so to me, I think they're like the Cylons on Battlestar Galactica. But that's about all I know, is that they're human height robot people.
They're people from the Earth's twin planet Mondus, which is on the other side of the sun. Their race was starting to die off, so they started upgrading and improving themselves, and eventually they wound up turning themselves almost entirely into robots. And now they think that actually being robots is pretty keen. Everyone else should be robots. What, you don't want to be robots too? Okay, we're going to conquer you and make you robots, and you'll thank us for it.
And do they also have a word that they yell?
Delete, 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 because we have computers now.
Got it. I remember I saw something where it was Daleks and Cybermen going at each other, and they were yelling, "Exterminate! Delete!" And that was going on for at least a minute.
I don't care for that episode too much, but that part is great. It's like, you superior in only one respect. And what is that? You are better at dying.
That's pretty funny. We did it. We made it through. Genesis of the Daleks. Any parting thoughts before we rate Gargus or Brian?
So I wanted to express appreciation for some of the production design here. It's simple, but they realize this environment. It's like you can tell that it's set, but they give the impression via miniatures and set design of, okay, this is a battlefield, this is the surface of a planet, and there's different camps, and it's like cost-effectively realized. I really like the little carts that they ride in to go down hallways a little bit faster, and it goes like, and so anytime there was some little gadget, I gave it a point for that.
They even get the BBC Quarry, and you always got to have the BBC Quarry. There's a million alien planets in the universe, and they all somehow look like quarries in Wales.
Well, I think I'm ready for us to rate Genesis of the Daleks. Is it good as our signature section, where we each give the movie or the serial a rating on our 8-point goodness scale, ranging from very not good, which is a 1 out of 8, to our masterpiece rating, Tortigood, which is an 8 out of 8. Brian, why don't you throw something on here first? Is Genesis of the Daleks good?
All right. So this was a challenging one to rate. it was different than some things that we've talked about before. I suppose we've had miniseries, probably, stuff like Over the Garden Wall, but in the sense that this is like one arc of a long-running TV show that we haven't necessarily been exposed to very much before, and a TV show that's gone on so long that there are many different eras. I think I'm going to give it a 4 out of 8, a good-ish, and a lot of that is my appreciation for the production design, some of which is genuine, some of which is maybe ironic. I really liked the way that the Daleks kill people. I laughed every time. It made me want to be one of these actors who gets to go, ah! But I mean, I could see why this is a storyline that stuck with people. It's got the weightiness of it. Like, any time that you get to the roots of a core villain of your show can be compelling. Like, well, where did the Joker come from? Where did Professor Moriarty come from? That's fertile ground for storytelling. So I am glad that we watched it. I don't necessarily feel motivated to dive down the Who rabbit hole, but I'm glad that we did this.
And it's like, way I see it, one, when you're deep in Who fandom, sincere appreciation and ironic appreciation definitely intermingle together all the time. But two, the way I see it, it's like, what you get out of Doctor Who is what you get out of it. If you watch a whole bunch of it in a row, you just watch one serial, so long as you're happy to have done it, then that's good enough.
I'm glad you said that last thing, because I've kind of wondered if that's like the key piece of being a Doctor Who fan, is like getting on its wavelength of silliness and like appreciating that at like a semi-ironic level, but also like vibing with the sort of sci-fi stuff too. It's like you kind of got to hit both the tone that's kind of humorous and kind of silly, but also like the sci-fi stuff. And I'm a little bit of the way there. I'm gonna go ahead and give this one a 5, a good. I read on the Wikipedia page that they've edited this down to like 85 minutes. I can see how you would do that, because it did feel like there's fluff. I don't know if fluff's the right word. There's a lot of commotion that doesn't ultimately have a bearing on the final outcome. So you kind of gotta be in the mood for that kind of commotion, like oh, she's dangling from a bridge. Oh, they just got captured. Oh, they escaped. And like, you need to enjoy the ride and not just the destination. And I sometimes did, and I sometimes was waiting for the next interesting thing to happen, waiting for Davros to roll back on screen or something. I still don't quite get the appeal of the Daleks as villains. Some of it might just be like they get to do more stuff throughout the show's series, because they just seem very, very silly to me. I could never get over it completely. It's like they don't feel threatening. I get that they have doom lasers, but like still, I think it's, again, what you said, Gargus, that it's like you have to be on just the right suspension of disbelief and irony wave to like wavelength to really like get it. And I'm partly there and partly not there, I think. And I appreciate it. And I even like, I kind of feel like in some ways it's maybe dated a little bit, because like there's been so much just really deep, profound, great sci-fi literature, movies, TV that has been made since 1975 that honestly, like, it's reckoning with, boy, two sides can be bad and dark things can happen. Feels almost quaint, I guess. Not that it doesn't lack punch, because I think it does have punch. And like Brian said, I can see why this would be like foundational, like the kind of story, like that's where Who gets it all right. It's got action, but it's also got like deep thought pushing it. And I get it. And I feel that. So that's why I'm giving it a good, because I did find value in it, and I did appreciate it. And like Brian said, it's something different. So that's where I am. What about you, Gargus?
Yeah. Before I say my thing, I just want to say one last thing on like the popularity of the Daleks, in that I do absolutely think that even though, in the fiction of the show, that these really horrible monsters that go around, enslaving people and doing terrible experiments on them and trying to kill everything in the universe, omnicidal maniacs they are. In terms of real world popularity, you do have to understand that when they first came out, there was like a wave of Dalek mania in Britain, they called it. And it wasn't just, kids who were super into them and like, little toys you could get. It's like, they were putting out novelty singles of them. They were putting out like little candy bars and ice cream cones with Dalek stuff on the wrapping.
Oh
They,
wow.
they made two very campy movies out of the first two serials featuring Peter Cushing as the Doctor. I think the fact that they are, you know, undeniably silly monsters that only really gain any kind of threat if you buy into the show and really take what it's doing with them seriously is the key to their popularity.
But also they stand out. They're instantly recognizable, and I can see why they would catch on when in a day when, in America 3 channels, in Britain maybe 1 channel. It's like you turn it on and wait a minute, what is this thing? This is different from what I've seen before. They catch your attention.
They weren't even supposed to be on the show. It had a mandate of, okay, you can time travel, you can do science fiction things, but absolutely no bug-eyed monsters. And they got on by being just so completely different and alien from any other sort of, man in a rubber suit bug-eyed monster you get at that time. And there's still kind of like not really anything regularly like them in movies and TV, I don't think. At least not as like, major villains that you're ostensibly supposed to take seriously. You should really look up I'm gonna spend my Christmas with a Dalek sometime. But anyways, as to my thoughts, I'm of two minds about this. One, how to rate this as a story in Doctor Who, and one in how to rate this as just an experience overall. For Doctor Who, obviously, I think it's one of the best serials that the show ever produced. It's one of those moments when they wound up hitting all the moments right. It's like you said, it's got the action stuff, it's got the suspense, it's got a little bit of the humor, it's got the show's morals expressed, it's got some deeper thinking than you typically get. I think it's a really good way of showing, if you were to watch this in context of a few others, like what this particular era was all about, having this really grim story going on with Tom Baker as the center of it, where he's sometimes reacting appropriately to it and sometimes he's being completely deadpan and carrying you through with his humor. I don't think I'd put it at a tour de good just because I'm very, very picky about which Doctor Who episodes I'm willing to call, like, unvarnished masterpieces, no question about it. And as we mentioned here, there's some problems with the logic towards the end, and a little bit of padding that makes me say not quite so much. So as a story in Doctor Who, I'd say a 7, exceptionally good. I do think you kind of have to take it down if you're watching it from the outside. Because, like you say, for you two, it's like you neither of you are dyed in the wool on this. Neither of you two have watched all that much Doctor Who. You're not entirely on its wavelength. So the silly parts are going to appear a lot sillier. The padded parts are going to appear a lot longer. I think in that respect, it's just something to watch casually if you're not a Doctor Who fan. It's probably closer in my eyes to very good. Its problems are evident, but if you can, buy into it and give it a chance, then its virtues will, I think, stand out quite a bit more than its flaws.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I like having guests on is because I appreciate that you do have the Doctor Who vision, the Doctor Who fandom gene, or not just gene, but experience and knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking to myself, well, I want to do something like for 50 years of Tom Baker, so one of the stories from that. And it was a toss up between this and The Ark in Space, which is best summarized, I think, as Alien, but 5 years beforehand, and sometimes the monster's made of green bubble wrap.
So that could have been a little different, I guess.
And if you're going to bring on Doctor Who, why not the Daleks?
There you go. Yeah.
Right. And I appreciate that too, that you picked, a very iconic Doctor to outsiders and one that's all about the iconic villain that even people who have never seen it know about. So it was a good way to kind of get us in.
Last thing I want to mention is just a line read from episode 3 that we didn't mention that I find very funny when Tom Baker walks up to some of the Thals who are guarding the rocket and goes, "Hello, can you help me? I'm a spy." And he puts their heads together.
It's kind of funny.
That's what the show's all about, really, those little things.
Right. I can see why that would keep you coming back to catch these little oddball moments. But yeah, that was fun. Thank you, Gargus. Always a treat to have you on. You always bring something different, and we're grateful for it.
I love throwing these curveballs. Next time I may even bring something that doesn't even exist.
I don't know what that means, but I guess we'll see if we see. So, Brian, I think, is it my turn to pick?
That sounds right. So what have you got in the chamber?
So, Brian, we just talked in the episode most recently released as of this recording about a handful of things, including some sketches, if you want to call them that I made when I was in high school. And I realized one reference point I didn't bring into that is that we were very inspired by the comic mode of the Derek comedy troupe. That was like an early comedy troupe.
Wait, and so this is Derek comedy with like Donald Glover, right?
Exactly. That's their
I don't know if you could call that an early comedy troupe.
Early YouTube comedy troupe.
Okay.
I may not have said that. Early internet comedy troupe. Early in this format of like dumb internet videos that are 3 minutes long.
Okay,
obviously,
yes.
Comedy troupes existed well before then. So
I think that fits.
I would need to say we're past my bedtime at this point. My brain is not firing on all cylinders. That's a good clarification. It's very specifically within the YouTube comedy realm. I think the Do Not Destroy guys who eventually made it onto SNL it's like they're following in a path that Derek helped trailblaze. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because I'm picking their movie called Mystery Team. Have you ever seen Mystery Team, Brian?
No, this one will be new to me. I do like Donald Glover, what I've seen of him from Community, among other things. I've seen some of those Derek shorts. And
I might send you a handful of the Derek shorts that are the ones that stuck with me. But yeah, it's a 2009 comedy film that's got... we'll see if it has anything interesting to say about it. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I saw it once. I had certain feelings about it, and we can discuss those feelings. So that'll be interesting, Brian. I'm looking forward to that conversation. Mystery Team 2009. Gargus, thank you very much. Hope you are well and hope you continue to be well. And thank you for joining us, listeners. Thank you for being with us here as we discussed Genesis of the Daleks and Doctor Who, A New Frontier for the Goods, a film podcast.
Always happy to be on.
I wish we could go out with the Doctor Who music. I remember our olden days podcast, Dan, where you would always bookend it with pertinent music.
I'll think about it, Brian.